If you've ridden long enough, you've probably heard of the American Motorcyclist Association, better known as the AMA. And if you've heard of the AMA, you've probably heard just about every other rider's opinion of them too. But it's best to hear about what the 200,000 member strong organization does straight from the horse's mouth. So, Nick Harris, Government Relations Director for the AMA, is back to spread the moto gospel and share exactly what the AMA does, which basically boils down to rights, riding, and racing. As someone who's been politically active for his whole life, Nick doesn't shy away from talking about some hot-button issues, like autonomous vehicles, electric motorcycles, lane splitting, and even helmet laws. No matter what you've heard or what you think about the AMA, if you give Nick a listening ear, you'll be surprised at how much work they put into promoting the two-wheel lifestyle, how much power you have as a motorcyclist, and maybe how much you agree with them. This is Nick Harris on the AMA. I'm your host, Mark Long, and you're listening to Driven to Ride. All right, Nick Harris, you are back on Driven to Ride. Thank you so much for being here again.
Yes, thanks for having me again. I hope to cover some new ground, and I appreciate, that we're taking a little extra time to kind of cover everything.
Yeah, so in part one, we covered kind of your motorcycle story and how you got involved with motorcycles, and also with the American Motorcyclist Association. But I thought it'd be kind of good to focus on the AMA kind of in general, because I think a lot of people, if they even know what the AMA is, they probably have some preconceived notions about it that may or may not be true, which we touched on in the last episode. But I figured we could kind of set the record straight and learn from the horse's mouth, as it were, about the AMA. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. We can definitely give it a shot. I mean, I'll tell you, my answer to that typically is, and this is of course in somewhat in jest, but not 100%, is the AMA. If you're a motorcyclist, the AMA focuses on whatever part of motorcycling is not your interest. And that seems to be this perception. If I'm an off-road dirt bike guy, all we worry about is repealing the helmet law. If I'm a street bike guy, all we worry about is keeping people riding in the forest. And it's humorous, but it's also a little frustrating because, frankly, a lot of what we focus on is what our members bring to us, and they tell us, "I want to work on this, I want to work on that. I have a riding area that my family and I have been using for generations in some cases, and we feel it's being threatened. There's some sort of Forest Service planning process going on we don't understand. So help us be engaged in it." The flip side is, I'll tell you that sometimes there's this perception that myself or someone else, and this is of course the government relations specific, I haven't been everywhere. So the idea that I'm going to show up where you live, like say in Illinois, I believe you're in Illinois, and know the local landscape, either politically or know, that, oh, there's a riding area and this is the managing agency and this is their rulemaking process. I may have some familiarity with it, but a lot of times the thing that I need is the local knowledge. If I'm going to speak about a trail system and I'm going to talk about the importance of the access at this point or at that point, I need someone who can actually tell me about that, because I'd be honest, I probably don't know. It's the odds of me having been there are probably pretty low. So it's a mix. And that's where we as a department try to really strive to have those contacts. When I hear about something, oftentimes, and again, it's people mean well. I'm not saying this in a negative way necessarily, but you'll hear about something and you need to get the full story. And so sometimes you'll have to go out and kind of do some digging and make sure, this thing I read on a Facebook post somewhere or somebody tweeted out is accurate. What's the story? What's the full story? So like our guys, a couple of them were at the NOVAC conference the last few days, National Off-Highway Vehicle Conservation Council. It was in Minnesota this year. And really the reason for them to be there, along with a number of other things, was the NOVAC community, the people that show up to that conference. It's not a giant conference, but the people that are there are super active and super engaged with their local on the ground, typically off-road land manager types. And so for myself, who may or may not have been to that particular place, like I say, knowing those people, knowing honestly that they understand what's going on, knowing that they're not going to, kind of go off half-cocked on something and freak out is super valuable. And then we bring in that experience of understanding, rulemaking processes. As I mentioned last time, a couple of the guys on our staff are former staffers. Understanding if I want to get my congressional folks involved, how do you best engage with them? So it's a two-prong attack, for lack of a better way to describe it. But the local person is absolutely critical. And likewise, if it's on road, it's the same thing. what do politicians really care about? They care about constituents,
Sure.
and I think I joked last time, if I want to kill something, I just show up and tell you in California, this is how we do it. Well,
Right.
that can be a negative. And so if I can show up, but with you and we're in a person's office who you're a constituent, it's huge. It's a huge, huge thing. So anyway, that's the shortish answer about that. But that is how we really work. And the other thing I feel like is I don't want to ever show up in someone else's area and say, you know what you should do. Like, I don't want to be that guy.
Right.
There's a guy I used to go to some of his lectures, and he had a great example. He would say, you know what an expert is? An expert is someone with a briefcase from 100 miles away. It's like, apparently no one where you live knows anything. You need this guy from 100 miles away. And of course,
Right.
the opposite is true. The locals are the people that know what's going on. They're the people that understand the history of something. That doesn't mean they know all the little nuanced little bits, but they are the ones. And the other thing is, I'm going to leave and go home, right? So if I help you and we have a good outcome, well, that's great. I'm going to go home. If I help you and it goes poorly and everything you are afraid of happens, I'm going to go home. So we need to make sure that the outcome is what the locals want and is achievable. I mean, I'll be honest too. I've gotten calls from people that really, are kind of unrealistic, their expectation. And I think that sometimes we need to realize that just because, you lived in an area where you could do, frankly, whatever you wanted 50 years ago, well, things change. There's a new housing development. There's, new this, new that. So I think that people have to be realistic about that as well. And so sometimes we have those conversations, and those aren't always the easiest, but I think it's important for people to realize that, we're not going to win everything. We're not going to lose everything. We're going to, we're one of many organizations that are working on stuff. But for me, I told you before, I was a member of the AMA before I worked here. And, and I've always found the government relations aspect for myself is the part that I cared about the most.
Cool. Well, yeah, let's zoom out a little bit. Let's remind me of what your official title is and kind of a brief overview of what you do. And then just a brief kind of overview of the AMA in general. Let's say somebody's never even heard of the AMA.
Okay, that sounds good. So I'm the Director of Government Relations. My name is Nick Harris. I've worked for the AMA for August 1st was 23 years. And when I first started at the AMA, I was the Western States representative. I guess technically I'm kind of both at the moment. And so I was living in Northern California at the time. And of course, the headquarters for the AMA is in Pickerington, Ohio. I was just there for the Hall of Fame induction ceremony. And then we also typically have had a DC office with DC staff for, I'm going to say it's got to be 35 years by now. I know it's long before I started. It's been quite a while. And in fact, Rob Dingman, who's the current president of the AMA and has been for a while, he was the Washington representative in the 90s. So
cool.
A long history of that. And then at the Hall of Fame induction ceremony, Rob Razor, who was the president of the AMA when I started, was inducted. He was voted in by the members. And he is one of the people he's the person that hired Rob Dingman. So it's kind of a funny deal, but he hired Rob back in the day to be the DC representative. And I want to say at the time, that may have been the first time that position was full-time. They may have used contract lobbyists. I can't swear that that's the case, but in any case, and then of course we have, so currently we have three staffers in DC that focus on Eastern states as well as on DC specific, so federal as well as state things. And then we have a gentleman in Ohio and then a gentleman in Denver. And so between those folks and then myself, so there's 5 total. So between those folks, I think we cover things pretty well. The gentleman in Ohio's name is Bob Davis, and he's really focused on grassroots. He's kind of oftentimes the first point of contact. So if you were to reach out and want to volunteer or want to understand more about like how do I get involved with the AMA, Bob would typically be the person you would talk to. And I'm sorry, I think you asked me a bunch more than that, but that's kind of the start of it. That was just a broad overview of the AMA was what you asked for.
Yeah.
So I mean, then of course our tagline is rights, riding, racing. So again, I've probably focused on rights quite a bit. Riding is another huge thing. Of course, we sanction tons of events. Typically, if there's a motorcycle event in your area for a poker run for your club or your local motocross or enduro races or anything, it's probably an AMA event. It doesn't have to be. There's other groups that do it. And typically with that, and I'm not like a competitive rider myself, but I've been to enough of those events over the years. The thing that I believe, my perception of that is it brings consistency to the rules. So if you show up from out of state and you want to ride an AMA sanctioned event, you can be confident the rules are the rules, that they're not, necessarily different. There's, a kind of a specific standard about having an ambulance on site if that's needed, depending on the type of event. And then also the other thing that the AMA in that area does a really good job is having insurance. And I think insurance is kind of, again, I'm kind of a little arm's length on a lot of this stuff, but insurance is the thing no one ever wants to talk about, because nobody wants to consider something going poorly or someone getting injured. And, it happens. People get injured. And so having insurance is critical. And so over the years, I've sat in on what they used to call risk management meetings, and they talk to a club. How do you have an event? Maybe don't serve beer at the start, things like that. But really, in some cases, real things that maybe seem obvious in hindsight, but maybe that's just how you've always done it. And maybe now you realize that we're creating a risk for ourselves. So the risk management thing allows the AMA to help these folks get insurance at a reasonable rate. This stuff is considered pretty risky by a lot of insurance providers. Sure. That's not a requirement. My understanding is you can get your own insurance, but you need to provide documentation. It needs to be shown to be legitimate. It can't be the Mark and Nick insurance company. It has to be somebody that actually offers a good quality product, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that people, I think, don't realize, and again, I'm kind of sat in these meetings and listen, is the liability can affect you as an individual, can affect your club. Maybe your club has some property. So it can be a real scary situation all of a sudden. And the flip side is, of course, if you get hurt, it's nice to know that maybe there is some coverage depending on the type of insurance. I know a lot of it's optional. So again, that's not my real spot. And then, of course, we're involved with pro racing. But in that case, you really, I think 2 issues ago, there was a really good description of that. I think there's a perception that we're doing a lot with pro racing, and that's just not the case anymore. We do we provide the course marshals, we do some of the sanction, the refereeing, and I'm going to get the term wrong, but we do provide that aspect of it, but we don't promote it. We're not really, that's just not our thing anymore. And that was quite a while ago when Rob made that decision to kind of get out of pro racing. And so, but there's still a perception of it. There's still our name is attached to it. It's kind of the way I think of it is like if the PGA sold off some sort of golf tournament, you'd still want to call it the PGA Championship because it has all that history and that value. But the reality is, maybe it's some other organization that's doing the promotion and running the event. And it's not a great description, but that's kind of my understanding. Again, I just watched the races. I really liked them, and I enjoy Supercross and motocross in particular. But I went to the Moto America races at the Ridge. It's a great event, really fun. And so there's a relationship there, but it's not, I don't think, what most people think it is. Sure. And then the last bit, I guess, Rights Riding Racing is we have the museum. And I was just back for the Hall of Fame. That is a neat event. If you get a chance, you can watch it. They do live stream it. But if anybody gets a chance to go to the Hall of Fame induction ceremony, it is just neat to see. For me, I mentioned Rob Razor was there, but Matt Mladen was being inducted this time, and I'm of that era. Matt Mladen, right. My dad grew up in Australia. I always felt like a bit of a connection to him. But Mladen was there being inducted. It clearly meant a lot to him, and to see somebody who I considered to just be this fierce competitor, kind of a hard ass, I guess, and for lack of a better way to describe it. But sure. His job was to win, and he went out and he won. And then to see Ben Spies doing kind of his intro speech was really cool, because I know those guys were rivals. They were hardcore rivals when Ben came along. He gave Ben a lot of credit and said, this kid pushed me. He made me better. He said, when he came, frankly, I was getting a little bored. I was winning. And so to have Spies show up and kind of dethrone him by the end of it, was pretty neat to see that. There was this mutual respect, and that was cool. And then, of course, Spies went off to race World Superbike, went off to MotoGP. So seeing that, I feel like Mladen had some pride knowing that not only did this kid push him, but he, I'm sure, pushed this kid. So, it was really cool. And there's plenty of other folks. There was a lot. Kevin Windham was being inducted. It was really good. Mike Lafferty and Debbie Matthews. She was super involved in making women's motocross a thing. And frankly, once in a while, these people get up and they talk, and you hear about what they did and the number of things that she had done and accomplished and set out to do when probably was being discouraged by folks. was really, really cool. And Mary McGee was there, same thing, to talk about Debbie and to talk about all the things that Debbie had done. So it's just a neat thing to see. So they have the event. Then you go down the street, like a mile or less. Then we went to the museum, and then they do an unveiling of the actual new displays at the museum. And again, I'm going to talk about Mladen, but to see Mladen take the cover off his bike and say, cool. This is the bike I raced. I think he said it was 2003 season, I believe is what he said. But he's like, I haven't seen this bike in, a while. And you hear him talk about it and the changes that they had made and how, this was, this purpose-built missile, basically. It was just really, really cool. And so all that stuff I enjoy. So that's another aspect of what we do. And I think we do a really good job of that. The thing we focus on at that museum is the people and understanding the people. You go there and you see someone's leathers and you see their helmet and there's a picture of them. And I was walking down, there's a big staircase, and I was walking down it one day, and there was Mike and Margaret Wilson were standing there. And I looked, it was funny. I was proud of myself there was a picture of these older people on the wall, and I looked at it, and they were standing right next to it. And I said, excuse me. I said, is that you?
You guys look familiar,
they just lit up, and they were the nicest people, and they had been very supportive of the museum. They had donated some money to create the Glory Days statue. And it was just really neat to get a chance to talk to them. And especially because it turned out she was their hardcore rider. And she had really, when they met, apparently had really gotten him to become a rider. So and these people at the time, they've both passed away, but at the time they were probably in their early 80s. And just the way they lit up and talked, and they told these amazing stories about what motorcycling meant to them. And I think that's what the Hall of Fame ceremony and that whole time, you just really get to see that. You see guys that stand up and say, my dad bought, 2 motorcycles in 1935. And, here we are. I won a world championship, that kind of stuff. And it's cool to hear those stories. For me, I love that stuff. And then they had the adventure ride. They have, they have a little pit bike track now at campus. So there's a lot of things going on that whole, couple of days can kind of entail. And then I guess the other big event I'd be remiss not to mention is the Vintage Motorcycle Days. I would really recommend anybody who hasn't been to VMD. I don't know if you've been, but you really need to go. I know we sometimes have a reputation as I always say, like a bit of a bowling team. That is not Vintage Motorcycle Days. Like, pull it up. I've heard on YouTube. It gets
a little wild over there.
It's a little wild. I've heard they keep it on a slow boil is the idea.
Okay.
Like it doesn't get too crazy, but it's really, really, really neat. They have every kind of vintage racing and even current, superbike racing. They don't have like Moto America level, but maybe the next step down. But every kind of motorcycle stuff. There's hill climbs, there's trials, there's road racing, there's motocross. It's a really, really fun event. And then, of course, the swap meet itself is acres upon acres of stuff. So you see just everything you ever wanted or didn't even know you wanted. I know there's some people that show up early and try to buy something and use it for the weekend and then try to sell it at the end. So there's kind of a contest. You got a $500 budget, let's say, and you spend $500, you spend the whole weekend riding this little pit bike of maybe from the 60s around, and then you sell it before you leave. Or the other one I was told is people show up, you have, again, of course, some sort of budget, and you buy something and you need to ride maybe 1,000 miles to get home. And so they have this contest where you fly in, you buy it, and then you got to get home. And then, of course, potentially sell it, potentially keep it, whatever the case may be. But I think that would be really fun to get a couple of friends together and do something like that.
Yeah. And these are
it is what you make it.
Those are both in Ohio, right? At the HQ?
The Vintage Motorcycle Days is actually about an hour north. It's at the Mid-Ohio Sports Complex, and it's, big track. They just repaved it. But everything else is, right around headquarters in Pickerington.
Okay, cool.
So you basically want to aim for Columbus and, adjust as needed as you got near there. But yeah, VMD is, and they just announced the dates.
Yeah, I've heard good things about Vintage Days from multiple different corners of the motorcycling world. So it has to be pretty cool.
It's July 25th to 27th, 2025. And I'll be the first to admit, I worked for AMA for a long time before I went. It wasn't because I didn't want to go, but when you've got a ton of staff down the street, it made more sense to, not spend the money to send me there. But well, the first time I went, I was like, this is not what I expected. Let's put it that way.
Well, it sounds like it's a lot more than, and not to discount the riding and racing, but it sounds like it's, everything and anything motorcycle related. You guys kind of have your hands in one way or another.
I think so. And I think a lot of that is, what do you as a rider, as an individual, or as a club want to do? there's probably some part of that we either are already doing or would be willing to consider. I have a friend who really wants to set up like a quarter-mile drag thing. I know he's been talking about doing that. And I know that there's been some involvement in that in the past, but he wants it. It's the classic, like it's like vintage drag racing of a certain era that he wants to do. And it's like,
okay, so
there's got to be five people.
Yeah.
There's got to be 5 people in the world that actually know what that is and probably have a bike in their garage that would be perfect for that.
Sure.
But he really wants to do that. So, why not?
Yeah. Well, so, and some people might look at the AMA as like kind of this monolithic figure, but it really is made of people, kind of like you mentioned. How does somebody join the AMA? How do they get involved with the AMA? Maybe what are some benefits of getting involved?
Well, I mean, the short answer, of course, is go to our website and you can join pretty quickly and easily. But as far as what you said, the monolithic thing, it's just not. It's people. I think when I started at the AMA in 2001, I remember walking through, the office and seeing like all these cubicles with helmets and riding jackets and memorabilia or autographed pictures or whatever. And it was like, man, I can't believe this is where I work. That was a neat thought. But as far as joining, it's pretty straightforward. It's on the website. And as far as the benefits, I mean, this is where I always laugh because, again, it's almost like, what do you want? And you go into the deals section, there's discounts for members, there's towing for coverage for your motorcycles. There's a number of benefits that will mean nothing to the average person because it's not their thing. And then there's other ones that this is critical. I never really joined originally because of that, but I've used the towing. I've locked my keys in the trunk of a car at MotoGP in Austin. I was very proud of that. I remember shutting the trunk and going, "Oh no!" Like I saw the
you
two
knew exactly
keys.
what had happened.
I knew what I had done, and then I was on a friend's bike one time and it broke down, and I got it towed. So there's all of that stuff. But then as far as getting involved, I mean, I mentioned Bob Davis earlier, who's our grassroots guy. That would probably be the place you would first have contact with us for volunteers. And then with volunteers, I mean, it's such a broad range. So do you want to work at, some sort of hospitality check-in thing at a race? Do you want to go to the Capitol? Do you want to write a letter? Do you want to do public testimony? The California OHV Commission, their next meeting is coming up. Do you want to get involved in that? So I'm hesitant to tell someone, I mean, I always like to quote other people, right? So someone told me once, a volunteer is someone who's paying you to work for you. They're giving up time. They're taking time out of their life, out of their day to do something. Yeah. So clearly it means something to them. So I think when you have a volunteer, you've got to be real careful to let them do what it is that they want to do. I can't tell a dirt bike guy to go testify on a lane splitting bill, for example. So I want those folks to get involved in a manner that they define. This is the thing I want to do. Now, sometimes what you'll find is people get involved. Hopefully they have some success. And then that spurs them on to say, you know what? I do want to work on this other thing that I didn't even know about or didn't even care about 6 months ago. But now, I kind of got a taste for this, and they realize, that there's a broader, bigger world out there than the thing that they were focused on. So that's always cool too. And honestly, maybe that I mentioned Novak earlier. That may be one of those things people find. They go, hey, I want to work and I want to volunteer in this organization. They have what they call state partners. So, and likewise, AMA over the years has had a number of different volunteer programs. So, it kind of depends on what the person wants to do. I used to work all the IMS shows for years on the West Coast. I used to tell my boss, I'll go anywhere you want in Seattle. And I would come to Seattle. I'd stay at my mom's or my dad's. It was like you won't have to pay me anything to stay here. But the thing I liked about the shows were we had the same volunteers year after year after year.
Sure, yeah.
And I really enjoyed getting to know those folks. But again, I like to work with volunteers to understand what it is they want to work on. And I want to give them the opportunity to do that. The flip side is, of course, there's also lots of AMA clubs. There's lots of districts. So, maybe working for AMA Ohio, as I've often called us, is not, not the option, not the only option. Maybe you want to go and work at a local club and help them out. They could use it. I mean, there's some very old historic clubs that do some great stuff that are all volunteers, run by volunteers 100%. So it just depends really on what people want to do. And again, our website, this is always a challenge, I'm sure, for the people that run the website, is there is so much stuff on there. It's
Hmm.
challenging to find stuff the first couple times because there is so much. There's a little, I'm looking at it right now. There's a little, like magnifying glass that where you can search
Yeah,
at
yeah.
the upper right. And that may be the best way to do it because maybe you know what you want to find, but as far as how to navigate to get there, but it is layer upon layer upon layer of opportunities and of information. But sometimes I know it can be a little frustrating to get there. And like I said, as far as the joining that, there's an option right there. You can sign up for, like we do a thing. Actually, I've run it for many, many years called News and Notes. So if what you
Okay.
want to look at and be kind of aware of is kind of, I'll call it a 30,000-foot view of kind of government relations stuff and just
Sure.
industry stuff. It's historically, it was like 4 pages long. And we had to make it 4 pages because a lot of clubs would print it out and include it in their newsletter.
Oh, sure.
Well,
Yeah.
as the world has changed, it's not that important anymore because now obviously it's electronic.
Right.
But there was a couple clubs that I knew they saved the centerfold of their newsletter, and they also needed it by the end of the month so they could get it and get it inserted. So all of that has changed as the world has changed. But it's a really fun little way to kind of see what's going on. And the other thing that I like about it, and I've been putting news and notes together for a long time. I enjoy it. It makes me go out and read and look and see what's going on in other places. And so for folks that read it, and I think, honestly, we have a real core, like 5 or 10,000 people that get it. I don't think it goes to 1 million people, but I think the folks that get it, I do see it kind of shared around, which is nice, but it'll just get you to kind of look at other things, get you to look at, like, oh, I live in Illinois, but hey, this thing's going on over in Maine, or this thing's going on in Florida.
Yeah.
So the idea there is just kind of let folks know what's going on in other places.
Kind of gives you like a full perspective of like motorcycling in general in America, almost is what
Exactly. And it comes out once a month. So it's not typically going to be too in depth, but it also oftentimes, if I can, I'll include a link to the source, or maybe I've boiled it down to 4 paragraphs and it's 4 pages. So it'll get you there and get you, off to see something. But again, our website's full of stuff like that. There's areas where you can subscribe, for alerts. If an alert comes out that's, in your area.
Yeah.
I will say sometimes I think people expect that there's 10 alerts a month that are going to come to your area. It's a good thing there's not, right? It's good that there's not 10 threats to motorcycling in your hometown, every month.
Yeah.
So it is a little bit of a mix.
Sometimes no news is good news.
Exactly. That's a good way to say it.
Yeah. What's something maybe in your experience that you've discovered that people are surprised that the AMA is either involved with or does or advocates for? Have you had something come up kind of over and over again that people are surprised you guys have your hands in?
Well, I think, there and again, on our website, if you go into the rights section, there's a board position statement area. And in fact, we just updated 3 of them a couple days ago.
Sure.
So my piece of advice to people is don't take my word for it. Don't take Mark's word for it. Go read the board position statement about helmet use, about automated vehicles, about lane splitting, whatever the thing is. What do I, as an employee of this organization, rely on for my marching orders is the board position statement.
Sure.
In some cases, we've gone over the years to the board and said, we need a position on this. Automated vehicles was one. Lane splitting was another one, where like 15 years ago, nobody was talking about these things. California did it in lane splitting, and that was it.
That was that.
Well, obviously it's not that way anymore. And same thing, automated vehicles 15 years ago. I know Rob did some columns pretty early and talking about kind of, Brave New World kind of stuff. But nowadays, these are cutting edge, important things. So rather than, like I say, let me kind of paraphrase what it is, go read it. It's public. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes people find it surprising that the thing they believe is our position, and maybe not our position, or maybe it's a little more nuanced than what they want to believe. Like the helmet one, for example. There are people that say we're anti-helmet. I wear a helmet every time I ride a motorcycle. I feel stupid if I'm not wearing riding pants. I hate riding in jeans. I feel like I'm not, dressed appropriately. We believe adults should have the choice, but we also believe you should wear one. And it's pretty clear in our position. And so I think when someone says we're pro or anti something, I'm like, well, I don't know that that's how I would categorize or describe our position. I think our position is you should be able to do this as an adult, make a choice. that other adults potentially disagree with. I'm sorry to go off on all these stories, but I remember
No, you're good.
I was at a conference and I used to smoke, and I was at this conference. And so all of us are outside huddled around the door smoking as people do. And I won't say who it was, but there was a representative from an East Coast state, and she's smoking in one hand and drinking in the other. And she realizes who I am. I've got my AMA, clothing on. And she says, oh, you're with the motorcycle people. She says, I'm the chair of the transportation committee in my state. There will never be a helmet repeal bill heard as long as I'm the chair of that committee. And I said to her, with all due respect, you're currently engaged in two behaviors that some people don't approve of. And her staffer, I remember she had a staffer stand there who looked like he was like 21. He turned and walked away. I could tell he was biting his lip, because it's like, do you see the absurdity of what you just said? I get it. You think that people should wear a helmet. I get that. I'm not going to argue about that opinion. But the idea that you're not even going to have the discussion, that you're not going to allow anybody to have any other opinion while you're smoking and drinking, it's like I just thought it was really funny. I'm standing there looking at this person like, do you not see, the situation? And
a little self-awareness. Yeah.
It's like, I've decided I can smoke and drink, but I've also decided you have to wear a helmet. And I just thought that was really funny. So again, you go into there's a ton of good information on that. And then, so as far as if you were to come to the AMA and say, I want the AMA to work on this issue, whatever it is, my suggestion is always check the board position, because obviously I'm not going to work on doing something that's 180 degree opposition to my board position. Right. But it also allows folks to understand, like, where is the nuance. The other thing that sometimes you'll see is a bill will come along. Maybe we'll just stick with helmets. Maybe it's a helmet repeal or choice bill, as we would call it.
Okay.
But it's going to require you to have some ungodly amount of medical insurance. So It's very clear in our board position that while we think you as an adult should have a choice, we don't want some sort of a trading, one
like
right for another.
Financial deterrent.
Yeah, financial deterrent. Exactly. And I understand people say that, motorcyclists without helmets can be a costly thing. And I've yet to see any data that really proves that. I mean, clearly there's going to be horrific examples of people that get hurt. Right. I've talked to friends that are riders. I have a good friend who's an EMT and a rider, and he doesn't agree with that particular thought. But he says, people do get hurt. People get hurt with helmets on. So sure. it's not an easy thing. And people get hurt. I mean, I used to say you can eat at McDonald's 4 times a day. I mean, it's like people do things that other people don't approve of.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily think that should be the deciding factor. And like, hey, I'm a guy that wears a helmet. I'm a guy that wears gear. I years ago, you would ask me at one point, what do people know me for? I was thinking about that. I had friends that would show up at my house in California, and I would disapprove of what they were wearing. And I would go dig through a box and give them better gloves, or I'd find an old jacket and I'd say, take this jacket, damn it. I don't want you coming here, in a nylon windbreaker and like gardening gloves. So I would go find and give stuff away, So, all of that kind of stuff is, but again, it's an adult, it's a choice. So we don't actively fight helmet bills for minors. There's also been a couple of states that have run them where they require them for passengers. Okay. It's not the kind of thing we get too worked up about. And frankly, as I described before, it's probably not the kind of thing I'm knocking on doors trying to accomplish. It's the kind of thing when a rider or a group of riders in a state comes to us and says, we want to work on this. Can you help us? Mm-hmm. We will do that. But we're not going to show up in your state and tell you again, well, you know what you should do. It's like, no, that's not how we operate. And that's not how we've operated in the time I've been here. But their other thing that we've done over the years is we do have people that are interested in whatever an issue. What I recommend, it doesn't matter if it's to a legislator or to a member of the public or an AMA member, is we are probably familiar with other efforts in that same arena. So the worst one was, I don't think I talked about this the last time. There was a bill proposed in Connecticut. I want to say now it was 3 years ago. So Connecticut is what I'll refer to as a choice state, a helmet choice state. Okay. So this bill was proposed that would make you, a rider not wearing a helmet who got into an accident and was killed, a mandatory organ donor. Okay. And it was just like, that is just in my way of looking at things, that is just so offensive on so many levels. Number one, there are people who literally that's against their religious beliefs. So I think, that's a thing to consider. But it just blew me away. But the thing that was funny is when that came up, we had a discussion internally about how we we're going to respond. And I'm the old guy, right? So I'm sitting there kind of waiting. And so finally I said, so, this was proposed in New Mexico in about 2003, 2004.
Okay.
And they said, really? So, of course, we went back and looked at what we had done in New Mexico when this was proposed. But what we did this time that was a little different is, as we were talking and thinking about it, we realized that there are organizations, clearly there's an organization for everything. So there are organizations that advocate for the choice to donate organs of your loved ones, of yourself. You get that choice a lot of times when you get your driver's license, things like that.
Sure.
So there are organizations that are out there that tell you this is a very generous, this is something you should consider. So what we did is we found one of those organizations and said, are you aware of this legislation? And they were horrified. They said,
Really?
this is something that you should do as a choice because this is something you've chosen. You and your family, you and your loved ones, this meets your values. We do not ever want people to be compelled to do this. And so frankly, they were kind of the lead on opposing it. We helped, we wrote letters, but at the end of the day, we let them be kind of the lead on opposing it. And the bill died very quickly.
Yeah.
But it was one of those kind of funny things where it's like, we hadn't done that the first time. But as we were kind of kicking around ideas, it was like, wait a second, there's got to be someone out there that does this. And there was two groups that this is their focus.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a really good example of the fact that nothing exists in a vacuum, even motorcycling, that one, maybe legislation or idea or proposal is going to affect other people down the line, or it may, rile up some other people, that you didn't know, maybe allies you didn't know you had. So, well, if you're okay with it, let's talk about maybe some issues or some things that are kind of facing motorcyclists and kind of looking towards the future. Cause you brought up autonomous vehicles, talked about electric vehicles, talked about lane splitting. If you're cool with it, can we talk about kind of some of that stuff and maybe look into the crystal ball a little bit, or, what we're looking to see maybe is helping to maintain the future of motorcycling?
Yeah, I think that it's funny you bring that up. Now, I by the time this is done, it'll probably have happened. But there's actually a hearing in California in about 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I got a call from a reporter at Cal Matters, which is kind of one of the public interest kind of NPR like news organizations in California. I believe they're reformed by a couple of the bigger NPR affiliates in California. I've had some good relationships with NPR over the year in California when we were doing the lane splitting, and also I think when we did the earplug thing, I know when we did earplugs at one point they were really interested. So they wanted to talk about the electric vehicle mandate that California is considering, and in particular, there's it's one of those things California has kind of have kicked around for quite a while. I think on some levels there's some misunderstandings about it because Europe is also kind of pursuing the same thing. So I don't feel like California is doing it in a vacuum. And I think a lot of times when I've seen people talk about it, they're acting like California is kind of out here on its own, and and they're not aware of what's going on in Europe. So from a manufacturer's perspective, I think what they typically strive for is consistency, right? If I'm going to build a product that I can sell here, I'd like to be able to sell it in other places and not have a specific one. I would, again, recommend you read it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. But I believe it's about 2032, 2033, they're starting to phase in what most people are saying would result in about a 50% electric vehicle mandate, both cars as well as motorcycles. I don't know because I've already seen that percentage and that timeline slide a few times. But obviously, this is a goal that CARB has currently, they're aspiring to. Let's call it aspirational goal. So the reporter wanted to talk about that, and she asked about kind of what are our thoughts. And I said our typical take on something like that is we don't like to see a mandate for a specific technology. Give a manufacturer a reasonable goal as far as, like, in this case, obviously emissions. Give them a reasonable timeline, and then allow them to figure out how to meet that standard. So I'm sure that the motorcycle industry, motorcycle consumers are going to have a lot of cool electric vehicle choices. They already do in some cases, but they're going to have more and more of them going forward. So I think that's important. But then you're as involved in this stuff as I am as far as paying attention. I mean, Kawasaki's been showing a hydrogen-powered motorcycle. Looks really, really interesting. There's some hybrid bikes that I've seen kind of kicked around. I think there is actually, I don't know that the hydrogen one is for sale, but I believe that Kawasaki has a hybrid motorcycle now that you can buy. So rather than CARB, dictating to, a Kawasaki, which is, this huge corporation that clearly makes a million cool things. Give them a goal, give them a timeline, and then let them say, hey, it turns out we can do this, meet these goals with a different product. And then the other thing you often see in those cases is fleet averaging. So, all right, you sell 100 cool electric bikes that meet the zero emissions goal, and you sell 100 of these other ones that, maybe aren't quite as clean. So that's getting lost in the weeds there on a specific thing. But it was a good discussion, and I actually put her in touch with a friend of mine who's an engineer who knows the ins and outs, the nuts and bolts of the technology better than I do. So I thought that was a fun opportunity just to talk with someone who I didn't feel came to me with any sort of a agenda, so to speak. She really wanted to know about this issue. So, but then the big one right now, I mean, and again, I feel sometimes like a broken record, is lane splitting, lane filtering. There's clearly an appetite for it. We actually have heard that there's, I think that we're hearing rumors of Michigan wanting to do something. I'm not sure what the timeline is on that, but it seems like it could be a quick one. We'll see how it plays out. When Montana did theirs, it was a similar situation where it's pretty fast. So that's ongoing. And then as far as like off-road, I mean, the other one that we haven't really touched on a lot is off-road. And when there is a land management planning process going on in your area, to be engaged. And they can be very frustrating. They can be a little bit foreign as far as understanding the process and the timeline, but it's good to be engaged and to make sure that your voice is heard. And then I guess the other one is, are you familiar with RTP, the Recreational Trails Program? A lot of people aren't. Okay,
no,
so RTP,
tell me all about it. Yeah.
Yes, RTP. If you go back to the 90s, there was actually a guy named Clark Collins who formed the Blue Ribbon Coalition. I was on their board at one point for a little while. Rob Dingman, our president, was super involved. So there was this concept that you and I buy fuel, obviously, and some of that fuel is burned or is used off-road. Mm-hmm. So there was a study, of course, and as per normal, I've seen a couple of these studies. They attribute about 1% of the fuel purchased and used in this country to off-road uses. So, you buy 5 gallons of gas for your dirt bike, you go out, you go riding. Well, there is road tax collected on that fuel when you buy it. Well, is that really where the road tax money should be spent?
I got
So
you.
RTP, the Recreational Trails Program, has a long history from the 90s when it was created and authorized. It was first called the SIMS Act, and then they changed it to Recreational Trails Program. So the feds collect all this money, and I always make it easy because I'm a slow man. So they collect $100, right? And of that $100, they've decided, well, they collect 1,000 of that 1,000. They decide $100 is going to go back to this RTP program. They dole it out to the states. The states, you can debate about like how much individual states put in versus what they get back, but it doesn't matter. There's a funding mechanism. Mm-hmm. So then they take that money and they split it into 3 parts. So 1/3 goes purely to motorized programs that benefit motorized recreation. 1/3 is earmarked for non-motorized. And if you think about it, okay, I'm driving 5 miles up a dirt road in my pickup truck and I'm unloading my mountain bike. So it's that kind of example, or I'm going cross-country skiing, I'm going hiking. And then the other third is supposed to be, it's really 30, 30, 40, but I just think of it as 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. The other remaining chunk is a competitive grant, pot of money. So every state with, I think there may be one, maybe Rhode Island is the only state currently that doesn't do this, but the vast, vast majority of states have an RTP program. So the RTP program then creates funding opportunities for a local club that wants to go out and do some trail work. And they need, in a lot of cases, they're very small amounts of money, but the amount of money is critical. If you and I and our friends want to go out and do some trail work and we need $5,000 to buy some shovels and some picks and a chainsaw, well, that can be the linchpin that creates 1,000 hours of volunteer work. And typically, obviously, you would work with a land agency like the Forest Service, the BLM, or your state land managers. But those are huge. If you go in and dig into some of those grants, I mean, for a very small amount of investment, you get a lot of return. So we obviously support that. It's a great example of one of the things that the motorized and the non-motorized community are like, singing from the same hymnal. They agree that this is a good thing. We can debate about how you spend that 40%, privately, in front of the RTP, money folks at your state level. But as far as to the feds, we all support this. We all think it's a good idea. So there's a reauthorization. Typically, it's about $85 million that they have attributed to this. It's probably significantly underfunded. It should probably be like $250 million. But at the end of the day, getting that reauthorized is a big critical thing, and it's due for reauthorization. So they're going to work on that. And again, it's a really good example of the mountain bikes, the equestrians, the hikers, the motorcyclists, the Jeep guys. Everybody tends to like it. And I will say that RTP model is used in a lot of states, and it's a similar thing where they
Sure.
kind of attribute a certain percentage of fuel tax to off-highway vehicle use or off-road. And the other thing to think about, of course, is the way they define that is not a single track dirt bike trail. It is,
Right.
you can drive the family car up a dirt road in the forest.
Right.
You're off highway, right? And it is funny sometimes having those discussions with people because they don't necessarily want to be an off highway person. And you're like, well, congratulations, you left the pavement. You're now an off highway person. So it is funny. And then the other really good examples with those monies that I'm proud to, when I see those, I was on a RAC in California, which is Forest Service Advisory Committee. So we talked about how to spend some of this money. Mm-hmm. Maybe you create a really wonderful trailhead that has, a bathroom. It has a unloading, like a loading dock, unloading place for bikes.
Oh, sure.
It has a big parking area so the guy with a horse trailer can park. And maybe that trailhead serves 3 or 4 different trail systems. So it can be a mutually beneficial type of thing. Maybe you create a map. Maybe you do some signage. There's a lot of examples of things that you can fund with those monies that can be multi, beneficial, not just for dirt bikes, not just for horses, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another really kind of exciting one that is coming and we're going to be very much focused on.
Yeah.
And then God knows, the other thing that does happen a lot in this job is someone out there right now has a really good idea that may or may not be really good for us that they're going to introduce. And so, part of this job is being reactive. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to figure out a way to make it work. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be a couple of modifications we can potentially make. Hopefully they've looked at our website or they've looked at some examples of other states that have done a similar thing. But inevitably, someone's going to introduce something. There's talk about a lot of states now are doing I finally pivoted to off-road. A lot of states are starting to do like a safety certificate. Oregon, Arizona, and Utah for sure have a certificate. In a lot of states, you think about like boating, they'll have a boating certificate or a hunter safety class. Well, they're starting to do
for off-road.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. They're starting to do off-highway vehicle ones. I was at an event in Utah about a year ago, and that was one of the requirements if you wanted to drive side-by-side, which they had a couple, was you had to have the Utah certificate. So I went online, I took it, and I think that there's starting to be, within the off-highway vehicle community, there's starting to be support for that concept. People are starting to realize that, you know what, just because you and I have done this for generations in our family, and I haven't, but like, let's just pretend I have, but I'm new, I want to do this, it looks fun. I don't know the first thing about it. So this is a way to kind of give people that initial information of where you can do it, how to do it. I mean, it talks about a lot of real basic things, but it's a good kind of introduction.
It's like a general foundation, like the MSF does the safety.
Exactly. That's a great example. That's a great, and frankly, they do have a dirt bike school. And so it may be that some of that curriculum is incorporated in some of these places. But of course, they're potentially talking about Jeeps, side-by-sides, motorcycles, ATVs. Yeah. So that's another big one that I suspect there'll be a couple of states that are gonna try to do that as well. And then the last thing I'll say about the RTP is, so think about federal highways in general. Think about all the funding that federal highways get. So we talked about that small piece of the pie that goes for off-highway. Well, the rest of that pie, there's big money. We're starting to talk about big federal dollars. Well, that money is for maintaining freeways, for building bridges. But the flip side is we have spent a lot of time as a nation and as a world kind of getting people into these high mileage, low fuel electric vehicles, whatever the case may be. So the money coming in is dropping. And the Highway Trust Fund has been running a deficit now for quite a while. So there's going to be say, what do they call a reckoning? A reckoning is coming on that. You can't keep funding it in the old way. And the old way was with a fuel mileage tax.
The gas tax.
The gas tax. Well, that is insufficient. And I know in states are having the same problem. Oregon has now got like an e-vehicle surcharge on your registration. I don't remember if Washington State does or not, but I know Oregon has done it.
Yeah,
and then
I think
some
Illinois
states are
does
starting
it too.
to do it. There you go. And then some states are starting to do that. They're starting to do the oh, what's the other one? Oh, they're starting to bring in what they call a VMT, which is vehicle miles traveled tax.
Oh,
So,
okay.
so they may have you, instead of doing a smog check, especially if you're driving an electric vehicle, they may
Check
just
your
want to say,
odometer.
how many miles did you drive last year? And I mean, on some level, it's if you're in a rural area and you've got to commute, I used to be that guy. I can see people being unhappy about that. But on some
Sure.
level, it's also like, hey, look, this guy here in an urban area is driving 10 miles a week. You're driving 100 a day. You're using more of the infrastructure. So that
Sure.
I won't say that we've gotten too far into that debate, because the other thing we would say is my motorcycle is probably not wearing out, the road as much as my pickup truck. So
Not
we don't
nearly, yeah.
necessarily want to be included in that, but it's an ongoing discussion, and it's in much bigger parties than us. Think about the UPS, FedExs of the world. They want good infrastructure. Amazon, they want good infrastructure. Yeah. So those kind of discussions are going. We are engaging with those folks when we can, but it's a big group.
Yeah. Kind of speaking of traffic and vehicle, highway usage and all that, obviously we're seeing the, very early stages of autonomous vehicles, and a lot of people are worried that motorcycles are going to go away, for lack of a better term, because of autonomous vehicles. Do you, and at the AMA, are you personally what do you see kind of the future of AMA or the autonomous vehicles and motorcycles maybe existing in harmony together?
Yeah, it's funny. We just submitted comments on they're updating the autonomous vehicle rule in California, and California, God love them, like they're tackling the hard questions in some levels,
Sure,
even if they're not necessarily bringing a solution that everybody loves, but they're trying. But they're updating their autonomous vehicle regulations, and in fact, so the way these rulemaking processes work, right, is they do like scoping, and they say, okay, we want to talk about autonomous vehicles.
Sure.
What should we consider? And they open that up, and the public has an opportunity to literally submit any idea they want. We're worried about anything you can think of. I mean, literally a laundry list. Then they go to their actual rulemaking process, and they say, we heard from the public. We heard 100 things. We really think it's these 20 that matter. So we're going to focus on these 20. So then they put out like their draft rulemaking idea. You could then still say, hey, you didn't include the 21st thing that I submitted. So there's an opportunity there. But the one that they're currently working on, that the deadline just passed, like 2 weeks ago, was, I was a little bit annoyed by it, but it was that process. It was we're just starting this. What should we talk about? So you read it, and that was kind of the opening line, is we're just starting to consider this for heavy vehicles. So they said 10,001 pounds or bigger, which they don't currently have regulations for. But then as you started to read the rulemaking pretty quickly, in like within a paragraph or two, it said, and we also have light duty vehicle regulations that already exist, which is your car.
Right.
We're thinking about updating those too. And so, so my first comment when I submitted stuff was, this is two separate processes. This shouldn't be all lumped into one. Number one, you have existing regulations for these light vehicles. So I would like to know how those are going. Like what data have you acquired over the last 5 years? We know there's, like the Google cars and things driving around San Francisco. We've all seen the videos of, actually, I may have said this last time too, right? Was the vice president's motorcade was coming along, and they had to have this, I think it was a Waymo car, just stopped in front of it and just sat there. And they actually had a cop had to go get in and drive it out of the way of, the motorcade. And they were saying, never mind the why did this happen? But this, from a security perspective, and if you're the Secret Service, that's got to be not a great day. But what data have they come up with that we should be including as far as understanding when we're making comments? So that was my initial comment to them, was you need to split this rulemaking into two bits. You've got an ongoing that you're updating, and you've got a brand new, like, we've never done this, what should we be aware of? So as far as that goes, I think it's huge. I think we have, over the years, been pretty adamant about, I mean, we're not going to stop this. Let's be honest. We're never going to stop it. There's billions of dollars being spent on this. So we want to be at the table. We want to be included. I think the final line in my comment was, if this technology cannot recognize and respond correctly to other road users, and I don't care if it's a pedestrian or a bicyclist or a motorcycle or another car, it shouldn't be allowed on the public road. I mean, that was my bottom line. It's like, I can't keep hearing about these things. There was a guy killed about 2 months ago in Maltby, which is just north and a little bit east of Seattle. and they pulled the driver out of the car, and it was a Tesla, and he said, "Oh yeah, I had it in full auto mode, and I, I wasn't paying attention. I think he was reading a book or poking his phone." And it's like, why is this vehicle even on the road? I'm sorry to swear, though. It's like what the hell? Why is this guy on the road? And of course, the response, if Tesla had a press office, which they don't, the response was, well, you're not supposed to do that. The technology doesn't actually allow that. It's like, yeah, but you sell it and market it in a way that is kind of misleading. So that was another part of my comments to CARB or I keep saying CARB. This was the DMV. This is California.
Yeah.
DMV.
Okay.
So the DMV, part of my response or in my comments was, when this stuff is marketed, it has to be marketed appropriately. There's level 1 through 5. Level 4 and 5, by definition, we should all welcome it. It should be great. It's better than someone tired, drunk, road raging, distracted, whatever.
Right.
That. If it does what level 4 and 5 says, that's a brave new world. It's going to be a good day. It's these 2s and 3s that are the problem. Where like my wife's RAV4 has, the what do they call it? The advanced cruise control, like the laser cruise control.
Adaptive,
Adaptive, thank you. Where it'll keep the distance from the car in front of you. Well, that's really cool. And it's got the lane departure stuff, and that's really cool. But you are not supposed to take your hands off the wheel. You are not supposed to not be paying attention. As you read the owner's manual, which apparently no one ever does, it says, this is not a substitute for you, the driver, being always ready to take over at a moment's notice.
Right.
So I think that gets lost. They have that. I hate to think I'm insulting the wrong manufacturer, but I think it's GM has that one ad where and I think Cadillacs do it, where the steering wheel lights up in green and this guy's towing in his pickup truck and he's passing someone and they're all clapping. It's like, that just is scary to me. And I think that is, it's a very limited circumstance where that works, but I don't know that I feel like that's being explained. So we said that to the DMV. If you're going to regulate these things, number one, the bigger vehicles, I'm concerned because, a semi having an accident is obviously potentially a much more serious accident, but crash, they also, if a semi having a crash is a more serious situation, but either way, I would like this product to be functional before it's put out on the public road. The flip side again is if they can make it work, I think it's kind of a cool thing. I don't want to be afraid of it, and if it's going to work, it's just got to do what it says. And I feel like we have become kind of the beta testers of that, and I don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a little too serious of circumstances to be the beta testers for that. But I think I agree with you too that if it does work as what it says on the box, it could actually make the road safer because you don't have people who are angry, tired, drunk, vindictive, whatever.
Exactly.
It might make the road safer for motorcycles. But from what I'm getting from that is we're just even at the start of that. We don't even have any data to go off of to start making opinions on it almost.
I feel like that is the way. I feel like there's a lot of motivation to not share the data, not necessarily the DMV, but if I'm a manufacturer and I'm having problems, I think it's, God, and I think there's a couple manufacturers now that have pulled out of California and lost their permit. They're doing it in Arizona, but they're not doing it in California. So that says a lot when you can't do it in the largest market where you would clearly want to do it. And but then the flip side is, remember there was that video that came out, oh gosh, like 2 or 3 years ago. It was a BMW GS that was self-driving.
Oh,
and I remember seeing it and oh my God, I mean, people, I was a little bit surprised the way people reacted. A lot of people seemed to take it as a negative that, oh gosh, they're going to not let me ride my motorcycle. They're going to make me have this autonomous thing. I didn't think that any manufacturer wanted that. What I thought is, for safety testing purposes, this is brilliant. Now I can have a couple vehicles out on a test track and quite frankly, not kill a test rider if everything goes poorly.
Sure.
I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen, and so I think that technology is very promising. And then of course there's some other stuff. And in some cases, the Europeans, my coworkers or my colleagues on the FIM commission that I serve on, they talk about some stuff. There's been some testing where vehicles are going to talk. And so hopefully, your motorcycle, you're buzzing along, or maybe it's an older bike and you've got now a little device you've added, your phone on the handlebars. It is literally telling the vehicles around it, I'm here, I'm going this fast, I'm in this lane, etc. And all the other vehicles are thereby not only talking with it, but they're sharing information. So a car a mile back knows up ahead there's this, there's that. Then so they call it V to V, which is vehicle to vehicle, and I think the other one is V to I, which is vehicle to infrastructure. So potentially also there's a bridge that says, hey, this concrete on my bridge is 25 degrees. It may be slippery. So I think all that stuff is really, really interesting. I don't want to be afraid of technology, but I also feel like, maybe there's a bit of a rush to market. And I think there's a bit of if I can be first to get my product out, I can, kind of finalize it later, but everybody will think of me, whatever the manufacturer is, as the person that did it. And therefore I'll sell more than the guy that maybe has a better, it's the VHS Betamax thing for us old people, right? Like the person that made the better one, in my understanding, lost, right? Like the other person got out and that's what everybody bought. Supposedly the other product was the better product. So.
Yeah, we'll have to see. But let's bring it back to the present. You mentioned there is some lane splitting and filtering that's not just in California anymore. Kind of a two-part question. How many states do kind of have some sort of either lane filtering or lane splitting law on the books now? And do you think we're going to see it maybe nationwide at some point?
So I'm always hesitant because I feel like I'm going to miss one. But obviously California, we know the history of that. I was super involved in that when they actually kind of changed the law. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what we did. But California, second was Utah, which was Walt Brooks, was Representative Brooks I talked about last time.
Yeah.
And so they have a different version, but a very good version. Arizona, Montana, Colorado, and then as of July 1st of 2025, Minnesota will have it. So they've passed it. It's just going to be a bit of a slow phase in, but it's not in effect yet. And so then so people often ask what you just said, though, is as far as nationwide, there's no way you would make that happen on a nationwide basis. The feds don't have that kind of authority. So in theory, you could potentially create some sort of incentive, which is how we got national seatbelt laws back in the day. And frankly, there was a big push in the 70s for the helmet law, which then they ended up passing a law that would not allow the feds to, was called blackmailing the states into doing things. So that's probably not going to ever happen on a federal level. But I think as we see more and more, in fact, when Utah did it, I think that changed the discussion. It changed it a lot. And I get that people are concerned about it. I mean, when I moved to California, I was a pretty experienced motorcycle rider. I commuted in Seattle rush hour traffic over to Kirkland to a motorcycle shop. And so when I moved to California, I saw people doing it. I didn't know anything about it. I thought, this is the thing. So the way I first did it after, getting my feet under me, so to speak, is a CHP motor officer passed me in traffic doing it. And I tucked in behind that guy, and I think I held my breath for like 30 seconds. And then almost immediately I realized this is really not a big deal. And it was shocking to me how much of a non-issue it was. In part, I'm sure, because the drivers in California are used to it, but in part because there's a lot of space there. And as long as you're not, and oftentimes I told you I was on some NPRs back in the day, and they were radio interviews in particular, people always want to come up with some, very horrible, egregious example of someone doing 100 miles an hour and stop traffic. And my response to that is that's reckless operation. That is not what we're talking about. And no one, oftentimes it's a panel. It's like no one on this panel is here to defend that. And I always want to make that clear. But within reason, it's not only, in my opinion, a very, very effective way for all traffic to be improved, but also if you look at the UC Davis study, it's the injury outcomes were improved. It doesn't mean there was less accident injuries. The researcher, Dr. Rice, said he couldn't make he couldn't make that claim. But what he said is the types of injuries were better. The accident outcomes are better. So if you think about the kind of accident you would have, lane splitting, it's somebody changing lanes into you. It's kind of a glancing side blow. It's not you rear-ending someone, because motorcyclists rear-end cars, and it's not you getting rear-ended by someone, or obviously sometimes both. You get hit from behind, then you hit the car in front of you.
Sandwiched,
That's a worse, outcome typically for the rider. So I think there's starting to be more and more interest in it. There was the bill in Oregon that, like 3 years ago, we got it on the governor's desk, and it was very, very surprising to myself and to the folks in Oregon that I worked with on that it was vetoed. And so that is, I'm sure there'll be another run at that. They have a different governor, so that might help. I remember being disappointed in that one, because if you go back and look at the final vote on that bill, and I wish I could remember his name, but there was a gentleman that stood up on the floor and he said he was going to vote against the bill, but it was the single most bipartisan piece of legislation they had that session. He said, you look at the supporter, the list of, he basically said, I want to congratulate the supporters of this bill. You look at the folks that are supporting it. It was rural, it was urban, it was Republican, it was Democrat, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really neat. Even though he was voting against it, I thought it was like a tip of the hat. And it was one of the most, I can't remember the percentage, but very, very, very high percentage of folks voted for it. And for the governor, who hadn't indicated any sort of opposition to it, to turn around and oppose it. My only take on that was she didn't expect it to hit her bill, to get on her desk. So she didn't think she was going to have to deal with it. But it was disappointing. It was disappointing because I do think it's a good thing. And I think we talked about this last time. It's optional. You don't have to do it. I mean, you want to kind of bring your A game when you're doing it, in my opinion. You don't want to be tired. You don't want to be, distracted, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's a thing. I've split on a Friday of a holiday weekend. I split from the Bay Area, San Francisco airport to just east of Sacramento one time. And I bet you I split almost the entire way. 90% of it I split. It was heavy holiday weekend traffic. I left the airport at 3:00 on a Friday, and I pulled into my wife's office, and she just looked at me and said, "How did you split the whole way?" And I said, "Pretty much." And the thing was, there was other bikes splitting, so it wasn't like I was the only person. I mean, it was just part of the flow of traffic. And you go to Europe, you go to New Zealand, it's normal. It's not a thing. But also, I mean, riders have to do it in a way that's responsible. I often say, like, 10% of the world has an opinion about motorcycling. They're in favor of it. You and I, 10% have some reason they don't like it, and then 80% don't care. So let's not move them into the I don't like motorcycling category by doing something stupid, and let's put them in the motorcycling is good category. Let's win them over, even if they're never going to ride in their lives. Let's get them over onto our side, but let's not do something. I will say the other one is I think people have a habit of remembering the bad actor. So if I go by you and I'm doing everything right and I'm mellow, and then the next bike comes by, maybe it's driving too fast, maybe it's doing any of a number of different things. Mm-hmm. That's the person that you're going to remember. And maybe the quiet guy on in his Aerostitch suit, putting by, who commutes every day.
You're never
he's a non-issue. You don't even remember the guy. But then, the person that decides to go by too fast, et cetera, is the one that kind of creates the impression for the driver.
Right.
And I think that's too bad, because I think that most riders do not, and when we passed the law in California, that was another thing. They were doing surveys of riders. The riders' reported behavior by the riders themselves, so for what that's worth, was that people were splitting lower speeds, and they were also not splitting when traffic was moving at higher speeds. And I will admit that I found myself doing that. It used to be, traffic stopped, you're splitting, traffic starts moving, you're still splitting, and then at a certain point, obviously, you get back into the flow of traffic.
Right.
Well, I will say that I wasn't as quick to get back in the flow of traffic. And then after working on that for a while, I thought, you look down, you're doing 35 miles an hour. Like, I should just get back into the flow. I shouldn't be doing this when traffic's doing 50 or 60 miles an hour. But it was natural. And so I changed my behavior as a result of that. And I think that was the other part of doing this is, obviously we have to educate the drivers, but we also have to educate the riders and get people to think about,
sure.
You're in Utah, they've renewed the program, right? They had a sunset and they renewed it. The current one does have a sunset, and I know Colorado also included a sunset provision. So now's the time for all of us to show car drivers that, this isn't a bad idea, because I think there are, there's a vocal minority of drivers that think it's a bad idea, and I would like to prove them wrong, but prove them wrong because we did the right thing,
Yeah. Well, that kind of leads me to my last question. What are some things, or maybe the top thing that any motorcyclist can do, whether they're a member of the AMA or not, to kind of promote the motorcyclist lifestyle and be a good steward of the motorcycling community?
I think that we talked about this again before. I'm known by a lot of my family and friends as the motorcycle guy, obviously. Mm-hmm. I think that is a thing that if people are comfortable doing that they can very much be that person, that voice, that touch point, And then as far as like on a political level, I mean, that is exactly the thing. So a lot of candidates or a lot of politicians have like a meet the candidate thing where they're at the local Starbucks on a Saturday morning once a month for an hour.
Yeah.
Go to that and be that voice or that face of motorcycling. And the trick there, and trick is the wrong word, but the idea there is I want to get a relationship with that person. I want them to know me before I need anything. I don't want it, because if you're an elected official or a staffer, I mean, most of your day is people that want something from you. They either want to complain about something you did or they want you to do something for them, right? And that's normal. Right. I mean, that's the nature of the job. But if you can establish a relationship with that person prior to needing anything, so then when a motorcycle issue comes across their desk, they say, you know what? Who's that guy that I see every Saturday at Starbucks, and et cetera, et cetera. So you become a voice for that stuff. There's no better feeling than getting a call from a politician who says, you know what, I want to get your input on this issue. So it's the flip side, right? It's not you going to them and asking for something. It's literally them coming to you. So I had this discussion with somebody once on a land use thing where they had a riding school, and long story long, they ended up losing the school because they were getting a lot of complaints. So they moved it to somewhere else. And I was talking to them about that. And he did great. You know, he was very, very, very pleased with his new location. And I said, so what are you doing to keep the new location and not have the problem you had at the previous spot? And he said, well, no, I got this new spot and everybody loves it. It's great. And I said, today. So what are you doing to create the narrative that this is a good thing? So I said, you should probably have the Boy Scouts out, you know, do a crab boil for the local Chamber of Commerce, you know, get involved with the Board of Supervisors, et cetera, et cetera. When I call and I say, this is a bad thing in our community and they're doing awful things, they go, oh no, I know that guy. This is an asset to our community. So he's like, tell your story now before someone else does. And so all that stuff. So as far as being an advocate for motorcycling, and then of course, you know, I would tell you, join the AMA. But if for whatever reason you don't want to do that, join the local abate. Join the local dirt bike club. Join, you know, any of a number of groups. There's lots of different groups out there that will do what it is, you know, do some research, figure out what is it that matters to you, and is there somebody out there that does what it is that you want. And I will say, do the research, because there are those folks. It's a slightly different one, but one of my pet peeves is motorcyclists that are members of AAA. That drives me insane. And I see people talk about it online all the time. Oh, I broke down and I need towing. And people are, oh, you should be a AAA member. It's like the last thing you should do in this world is be a AAA member. I can't tell you how many times I've been at various legislative hearings and AAA is testifying on a bill that I'm testifying on in opposition to the thing I'm supporting, or in support of the thing I'm opposing. So like, find someone else. The AMA offers towing, you know, find someone else. Right. But so, and that's, you know, that's my pet peeve, because AAA does a lot of good things as far as like mapping and trip planning. And I know in some states they do like titling and licensing, registration, all that stuff. That's great. Sure. But they actively advocate for not having lane splitting, for example. That's the thing that they don't want. They're an insurance company at the end of the day. So I find it ironic that riders do that. So, you know, do your research, look for a group that supports what you support. And I think sometimes people want motorcycling to be a kind of a partisan thing, you know. And I used to joke that in California, again, a moderate Republican oftentimes did things that I found not necessarily to be to benefit us. And I always figured they did that in order to prove they were moderate. Moderate Democrats oftentimes did things that helped us. And I thought they did that to prove they were moderate, right? Like the very thing that people thought. So like the example was Schwarzenegger signed a bill one year that we had specifically asked him not to sign, and just really was disappointing. And the flip side was Gray Davis and Newsom had a couple of opportunities along the way where they did things that benefited motorcycling. And in particular, the OHV Commission, the appointees on the commission, a lot of them that we liked and we supported. There was one, they had 7 members for a while, and now I believe they have 9. But at one point, I remember sitting in the audience at one of their meetings and counting the number of AMA members that were on the commission. And it was it was a majority. And they were all Newsom appointees. And I thought that was really funny, because you could argue about some other thing Newsom did that you didn't like. But in that context, that was the thing that I was kind of judging him on in that moment. The flip side, of course, is there are politicians that there's other things in your life that maybe are more important to you. I get that too. So if
it's fair,
if you I would say guns, taxes, abortion, pick one of the three lightning rods of politics. If somebody agrees with you on that and maybe doesn't agree with you on motorcycling, well, that other issue may be more important to you. I can respect that. So
sure.
there's no one politician who's going to do everything you want on every issue. So you've kind of got to rank them and decide, what's the most important. So,
but you can learn all about the goings on and connect with the AMA at the website, which is
www.americanmotorcyclist.com.
There you go. Perfect. Well, Nick, thank you so much for being on again and for sharing everything the AMA does and how to get involved and, kind of opening my eyes, at least to the nationwide view of everything that's happening with motorcycling. I mean, you hear that either everything's great or that the world is ending in motorcycles. And, it's like most other things in the world, it's a little more complex than that. So
it definitely is, Mark. And thanks for having me. I mean, I just want to make it clear, I'm the luckiest man in the world. I've got to spend 23 years thinking about motorcycles, and it really, it's cool. And someone said that to me once. It's like, good, bad, or indifferent, you've been paid to think about this for a long time. And it's something that I care about. And I really feel lucky. Our members are passionate people. They really, they want to do what they want to do. And I think in a lot of cases that's an asset, but it's hard to organize folks when everybody wants to go off and do their own thing, right?
Sure.
So it's good. And I appreciate your efforts in that arena of getting the message out.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Driven to Ride. Interact with us and check out full unedited conversations, photos, interviews, video interviews, plus other goodies on YouTube or Instagram at Driven to Ride Podcast. Or you can check us out at driventoridepodcast.com. And make sure you leave us a rating and review from wherever you get your podcasts, too. If you have an idea for an episode or a guest, or you want to invite us out on an adventure, email us, hello@driventoridepodcast.com. Driven to Ride is wholly owned by Flint Rock LLC, made possible with help from Matthew Miles, and written, hosted, and produced by me, Mark Long. We'll see you out there.